सदाकते इस्लाम कुछ भी हो जाएंगे हम जहाँ भी के जाना पड़े हमें जाएंगे हम जहाँ भी के जाना पड़े हमें.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Viewers, welcome to this week's Beacon of Truth Khilafat Special, in which, with the assistance of our panelists, we shall be discussing Hazur-e Anwar Ayatollah Ta'ala bin Nasr al-Aziz, the fifth caliph of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, may Allah be his helpers, tours throughout the year and his activities. Now, assisting us in our talk today, we have to my immediate left, respected Abid Wahid Khan Sahib, who is the International Press Secretary for the Ahmadiyya Muslim community and who has had the opportunity of accompanying His Holiness in all of his tours. And to my far left, we have respected Munir Ode Sahib, who is the Director of Productions for MTA International, the official channel of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, who has also been blessed with the opportunity of accompanying His Holiness throughout his tours. Now, without further ado, let's begin our discussion right away. Abid Sahib, if we can begin by just getting a brief overview of Hazur's tours and other activities during the year. Could you tell us how Hazur's year has been?
Yeah, I mean, just as every year seems to progress, Alhamdulillah, 2016 has been an extremely blessed year from the beginning to today. I mean, if you go back to January, Hazur attended and presided the convocation of Jamia Ahmadiyya, in which Jamia graduates from the UK and Canada both received their Shahid degrees. Then in February, there was a number of events, for example, inauguration of Voice of Islam Radio, which was a very historic day, and where Hazur blessed that station and actually delivered the first words on that historic day. Hazur inaugurated the Maqsan-e-Tasavir website. He attended the Jalsa Bangladesh and gave the concluding address. And in February also, you might remember that there was a mosque opening in Leicester, which Hazur attended. And then later in the month, Hazur delivered the main addresses at Waqf-e-Nau and Waqfat-e-Nau Ijtima'as. Then March is always an important month in the Jamaat's calendar here in the UK, because we have the National Peace Symposium. And again, this is an opportunity for Hazur to deliver the message that's needed in the world, where he conveys the need for the peace, the need for justice, the means to peace. And he did that once again in March this year. If we move forward a little bit, in May, Hazur had a very blessed and historic tour to Scandinavia. Hazur spent around a week in Denmark, followed by 2 weeks in Sweden. And during those 3 weeks, again, Hazur was able to spread the true teachings of Islam to the people of that country, whether it was through mosque openings, for example, in Malmö, or receptions that we had in Copenhagen and we had in Stockholm. There were a series of media interviews where again Hazur was asked challenging questions about the role of Islam in today's society. But to each one, without any complex, without any fear, but with a full certainty in the truth of Islam, in the truth of Islam's teachings, Hazur conveyed a response. Alhamdulillah, that was extremely blessed. When Hazur came back, one unique feature of this year was this year's UK Majlis-e-Shura. And Hazur not only attended it and delivered the main address at the Shura, but he also spent 5 or 6 hours at the Shura presiding it and guiding the delegates and making sure that everything was done according to the proper rules of Majlis-e-Shura. Of course, then we moved into Ramzan, where again every week through his khutbat and later on through his Darsul Quran, Hazur guided the Jamaat throughout the world about the importance of that blessed month. We then, of course, there was Eid, and then in August, Hazur inaugurated MTA Africa. And again, that was very extremely historic, and inshallah will prove a means of spreading the message of Islam much further in the African continent in the coming years and decades. And then, of course, probably the highlight of the year was Jalsa Salana UK. This year, Hazur told me to write a diary about the experiences and his activities at Jalsa Salana. And I think I covered the bare minimum, and it took me 4 volumes and almost 300 pages to just get a flavour of Hazur's activities, where people see on MTA, with the grace of Allah, Hazur's activities on the day of the sessions. But in the week before it, the week after, Hazur has hundreds of mulaqats with people on a daily basis. He is meeting different delegations from different countries, some of new MDs, some of old MDs, some of guests, and each one he is able to spread to them what Islam's teachings are and answer their problems and their concerns. Later in August and early September, then there was another very blessed tour of Hazur, where he went to Germany for 2 weeks, and Hazur laid the foundation stone for 2 mosques. He opened 2 mosques, and of course he attended the Jalsa Salana Germany, which was again an extremely blessed Jalsa with the grace of Allah. And then, as most of our viewers I'm sure are well aware, in October and early November, Hazur was in Canada for an extremely historic, Manisa was there as well, and blessed tour. At the beginning, Hazur attended the Jalsa Salana, Canada. Thereafter, he spent the best part of a month in Peace Village. And none of us can forget the scenes there when Hazur used to come for namaz, and the throngs of MDs used to run along the streets, trying to get a glimpse of Hazur, sometimes in the bitter cold. Yeah, I think you can see some of these scenes here, about how people would wait sometimes for hours just for that glimpse. And when they saw Hazur, their tears knew no bounds, and Hazur would wave at them very, very lovingly. In Canada, apart from the Jalsa, Hazur addressed 6 receptions. Of course, there was a very historic event in Parliament Hill, where Hazur had a series of meetings and then had met the Prime Minister, and then later on also delivered the keynote address. He delivered the keynote address at a reception at York University, in Vaughan at a peace symposium, at 2 mosque openings in Lloydminster and Regina, and also towards the end of the tour in Calgary. So all in all, that was an extremely fulfilling tour. And I've just given some parts, but apart from that, there was a series of media interviews that Hazur gave, so many media interviews that we've probably never seen before. Hazur also on a daily basis was guiding the Jamaat through Amla meetings, through mulaqats, through meetings with different office bearers. And there was a series of classes. So the thing is, all in all, that was an extremely fulfilling tour and blessed tour. And then as soon as Hazur comes back, his work continues. And so in November, he attended the Lajna refresher course back here. And we all know, inshallah, in a couple of days, Hazur will be addressing the concluding session of Jalsa Salana Qadian. And then from there, it'll all start again, inshallah, in 2017.
Inshallah. Right, so apart from what we see on MTA, the various tours and stuff, it seems like Hazur's year is packed with various events, attending ijtima'as and different jalsas. Now, Munir Sahab, you are blessed with the opportunity to accompany Hazur on his various tours and serve in MTA, as I mentioned earlier. Wherever Hazur travels, MTA interviews people of various walks of life. How do non-Muslims view Hazur and the message of peace that he spreads throughout the world?
It's actually, it's very hard to convey, it's very hard to do justice to Hazur's engagement and activities, as Abid Saab tried to kind of give us a very quick overview of what happens throughout the year. But I think within that also it's even harder to carry the emotional aspect of things and the spiritual uplifting that Hazur's visit gives each of these countries that he does visit and meets the Jamaats there. And not only the Jamaat members who are uplifted, but also the non-Muslims also admit and state that this meeting Hazur and taking guidance from him, listening to his words, really uplifts him and gives them a sense of hope. There's another aspect to it from the spiritual uplift that being around the Khalifa of the time gives. It's the feeling of also being part of or seeing or witnessing the fulfillment of the prophecies of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the promised Messiah alayhi wasallam, and seeing, as mentioned in the Holy Quran also, that the promised Messiah alayhi wasallam, the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ, to kind of spread the message of Islam, the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the whole world. It has been fulfilled before, but it's also being fulfilled in a different dimension and truly in a worldwide phenomena. We see Huzur traveling to the Far East, to Africa, to Scandinavia, to the West, to North America, to Europe, and we can see that worldwide message, and the very simple message, yet very strong, very heart, touching the heart, and it really sinks in when Huzur delivers it and gives it, and that's what we witness when we're there. We have some clips, and I think one sentence that really kind of stuck to my mind is one of our guests said about Huzur that His Holiness doesn't have a story to sell, but he has the truth to tell. And that's some of the reactions that we've kind of captured as much as we can from the recent tour of Huzur. We can have a look at those.
I keep telling to my friend that I wish I can see him and I can meet him, and finally I meet him today and I get his signature. Yeah, I'm so emotional and I'm so blessed that her message is really strong, that it's like step on the, you know, it's really sharp, and it's really good that we have a leader, religious leader in the worldwide that wants nothing but just to love and peace for the humankind.
It reminded me of Jesus. Peace, love, no hatred, humanity. You can treat one another with love and decency, regardless of your faith. And if you're following the truth, then the world would be so much better.
My heart quivered, I know, because just the way he conducted himself was quite divine. He didn't have a story to sell. He had a truth to tell. He wasn't here to impress no one, but he was here to inform of the injustice that is happening. And as he said very beautifully, deeply from his heart, he prays that may mankind come to that realization.
The community is my family. To have time with His Holiness was humbling, overwhelming, and I got to hear his speech, and then we talked afterwards, and he taught me so many lessons, and the one particularly I take to heart, once a friend, always a friend.
I'm looking forward to participating in prayer in the mosque. I think that atmosphere of tolerance and ecumenicalism is just what we need.
A man that understands the world, understands the challenges we have in the world, but sees the good in humanity and how, if working together, we can create a better world for all of us.
It's beautiful how Khilafat influences not just Ahmadis, but also other Muslims and other non-Muslims as well. Now, Abid Saab, during these tours, you are fortunate enough to spend a good part of your day with His Holiness. Could you give us an example of his daily routine, please?
I mean, Huzur's daily routine, it never ceases to astonish us, and that's the truth. The more you see Huzur during a tour, or even here in London, the more your faith in Khilafat is affirmed, because it really proves that only somebody who has the support of Allah Ta'ala could achieve and accomplish what he does. Huzur himself has many times said in interviews or in classes that sometimes he doesn't know how he is achieving all he's doing or how he is achieving all his tasks, but somehow Allah Ta'ala helps him. And again, on tours, Huzur's routine varies from day to day, but just to give a brief overview of some of the things, of course, Huzur wakes up very early for Tahajjud prayers. And depending on what time Fajr is, the night can be very short or it can be slightly longer. For example, in Stockholm, I remember this year when we were there, Maghrib used to be around 10, 10:15 at night, and Fajr was at 3 in the morning. So you can imagine how short a period Hazur would have had to rest, if at all. Then, of course, after Fajr, Hazur recites the Quran, and then if there's time, he may rest for a little while. Then Hazur would get ready for the morning, or have his breakfast. But then even before Hazur comes to the office, he will be checking his office mail or preparing his notes for forthcoming addresses. And so the work starts very, very early in the morning. Then when Hazur does come to the office, he would then, in London, he would tend to, on many days, to have daftari mulaqats, where he would meet various officials from the Jamaat and give instructions and guidance. Even on tours this happens, but on tours the priority definitely is more for family mulaqats, where hundreds, if not thousands of MDs are able to come and see him during the tour and to share their problems and concerns with him. And it's during those meetings that you really see how a Khalifa truly loves every single MD, as though even more than a mother loves her child. And the impact upon the people who come out of the office. And hundreds of times, if not thousands of times, I've met people who've said that their lives have completely changed in those 10, 20, 30 seconds, or perhaps a minute or two. And they said that often they say we didn't even have the ability to speak in front of Hazur. But still, we know that all of our problems have been fixed. And all of our children, inshallah, will stay firm to the truth of the promised Messiah, alayhi salam, because of those 30, 40 seconds in the company of this blessed personality. Then, of course, then Hazur would later in the day break for namaz and perhaps have a little time for lunch and rest. But then again, even before Hazur comes back to the office, he will be doing some work with his, even in his residence. And then when Hazur does come back to the office, again, the program of mulaqats would continue. And he would again meet different MDs, but this may be interspersed on tours. Obviously, there'll be dignitaries who will come and see Hazur, or there might be delegations, or he might have some media interviews. And again, they would take up time where they would have the opportunity to ask Hazur questions. And again, the thing that always strikes you is Hazur's complete conviction and certainty in the truth of his faith, with no complex to bear. Sometimes they ask tough questions about, or what to us would seem tough questions, that why do Muslim men not shake the hands of women? These type of things that they're trying to cause a little bit of provocation. But very calmly, with a smile on his face, Hazur responds to them and tells them that this is the logic underpinning all those things that you are raising. And then, apart from the mulaqats, the tarbiyat of the Jamaat throughout Hazur's tours is constant. And so again, Hazur will meet the office bearers and have meetings with them, whether it's Khudam, Ansar, Lajna, whether it's the Jamaat. And Hazur would, one thing I've always seen in the meetings is Hazur, how he tells the office bearers that the way to do tarbiyat is through love, is through shafqat, is through kindness. And he says that you need to have love and kindness amongst yourselves, and then show it to the other people as well of the Jamaat. And you need to excel in humility. And that's the standard we see of Hazur. I remember I met somebody this year at the UK Jalsa, and he said to me he met Hazur 20, 30 years ago, and at the time in Pakistan and in Sindh. And he said that he was a young khadim at the time, 15 or 16, the person who I was talking to. And Hazur, even at that time, was a senior member of the Jamaat. But he said that Hazur used to come and sit outside with us, eat in the same plates that we eat the same food, and had no superiority complex, and treated us all with love. And so that's Hazur's example throughout his life. Another thing Hazur always tells us to focus on is to focus on building our relationship with Allah. And that's we've seen throughout the year. And I remember, Manisab will remember as well, that this year after the UK Jalsa, Hazur had an interview with a Bolivian journalist. And in that, Hazur spoke about his own relationship with Allah, very personally, very beautifully. And Hazur said that when he was a child, 15, 16 years old, around that age, he said that he had a maths exam, and he said that he thought it hadn't gone well. So Hazur prayed, and he said that he used to go in the corner of Masjid Mubarak and pray and weep before Allah Ta'ala, to the extent that he said that Allah has heard my prayers. And it so happened that Hazur passed, but only because at the last minute the board decided to give grace marks. So because of those prayers of Hazur, not only did Hazur pass, but other people passed. So these are the tarbiyat points that Hazur himself is living, right, that he's asking others to also follow in his example.
Right. Well, that's a beautiful example, Abid Saab. Munir Saab, wherever Hazur travels, Ahmadis throughout the world, wherever they may be, feel connected to His Holiness through MTA. If you could just tell us how MTA serves as a link between the Jamaat and His Holiness.
I think Ahmadis by nature are linked to Khilafat directly with or without, but I think MTA has brought another dimension and brought the Khilafat so much closer. This is how even when I grew up, the Khilafat has become so close to me just through the screen of MTA when I was growing up at the age of 17, 18. But now you feel that with the love and affection, how close people feel to Khilafat, and that obviously from the kind of development of MTA and MTA being available to everybody, so the Ahmadis can hear the Khalifa directly. We in the past used to wait for weeks before you get the Friday sermon. Now you can hear it in so many languages directly through MTA. But just one point to touch upon is that what Abid Saab has mentioned is during these tours, it's what doesn't stop to amaze me is how Khalifatul Masih, as a human, I mean, unless he had the divine support, a normal human being cannot bear the workload that Huzur does. And I am not sure, I mean, if somebody sleeps at around midnight, or so you mentioned in some of the classes and some of the children waqf now, and you have to wake up 1 or 2 hours before tahajjud, there is hardly any time left for even sleep. And then to carry out a whole day full of activities. I mean, we accompany him on different tours, and for me personally, and Abid Saab can tell you his fear, by the time Isha Namaz or the prayer, the evening prayer, is about to be performed, we're totally exhausted. We're just waiting for that to happen and be able to kind of retire, and we go to sleep or rest while Huzur continues to work. So and we're much younger in age also. So that aspect is never stopped to amaze me, and with long travels. And I always feel that the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always with the Khalifa of the time wherever he goes. Anybody who travels with him really, where it's not like any worldly leaders who have their advisors and their on policy, on different subject, different topics. It's the Khalifa of the time is really, it's actually the contrary. He is the guide. His wisdom is that he departs to all his followers, as well as the non-Ahmadi crowd. A lot of people, politicians, very high officials come to him for advice and guidance. And that's where you see the divine guidance that the Khalifa has. And sometimes it's against the odds. We see that with the so-called Arab Spring, when Huzur was advising people on how to act or how to react to those developments in the Arab world, for example. And he would advise something which seems unheard of or maybe not correct. And after 2-3 years, the world realizes that every word that Huzur said, even the enemies of the Jamaat in the Arab world, they had to come and say, well, actually, every word that he said has come to pass. And we see that, and that's, I believe, and this is what the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in his books, to those people who are very close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah doesn't only fulfill their prayers when they request for something, and that's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them the support, but also Allah fulfills a mere wish that they can have if Allah thinks it should be fulfilled. And this, we see that in every aspect. In MTA arrangements where Huzur directs to do certain things which against the odds, it's very difficult to, whether it's to get a license for an uplink from a certain country or to do certain things. It's the only comfort that I have during that process is because Huzur said it, and it does happen. Sometimes it's the very last minute in a very unexpected way, it gets fulfilled. And I have experienced that even in the recent trip of Canada. And some of our teams in Canada used to say, why aren't you worried? We may not even get a permission to transmit from there. I said, I've seen that before. Huzur Ayadullah says something and it comes to pass without any difficulty.
Right, well, Abid Saab, many of us read your diaries with a keen interest to get an insight into Huzur's tours. Would it be correct to say that these diaries cover all the aspects or engagements of Huzur Anwar, or is there some stuff that you might have to leave out due to a lack of space?
I mean, Just before I answer your questions, just to give a little background to the diaries. I wrote my first diary after Hazur's visit to America in 2012. And at the time, my idea was that I just wanted to write something personal that perhaps my kids or grandkids in 20 years might enjoy reading. But it so happened that after a few days, I decided to share it with Hazur. And so I sent it to Hazur, and he read it, and he told me to send it to a few friends. And so I sent it to 5 or 6, 7 friends, and then I sent it to them, and I don't know, perhaps they sent some feedback or to Hazur, I can't remember. But then Hazur said, send it to a few more friends, and it kind of grew organically like that. And then the next tour, actually, I didn't write a diary because I thought it would be a one-off. And then the tour after that, then Hazur said that you wrote a diary once, you should be writing it regularly. And so that's kind of how it started. And it's only been possible with Hazur's encouragement. In fact, our readers, I don't know, our viewers might not know that every single diary that I write, Hazur reads every single word, and he actually takes out my spelling mistakes, and he corrects my grammatical errors. Even to that extent, he will go through them. And anyway, once Hazur's approved it, then I send it out. And as for your question, I could never ever claim that my diaries, and I don't think MTA could claim this either, that is a full analysis of what Hazur's tours are. If anything, it's just the tip of the iceberg. For example, I sometimes mention the feelings of MDs who I meet after they've just had mulaqat. But I might talk to or mention in the diary 3 or 4 families. But in that same session, Hazur's met 50 families, probably 200 MDs. And the thing is, the look on all of their faces and the emotions, it's impossible to capture it truly, whether it's even by camera, but especially in words. And the feelings of emotion that they bear. Similarly, when I discuss Hazur's meetings and his with Amlas or with different groups, I mean, we can see here when Hazur's meeting some of the Syrian refugees who had come to Canada, and how emotional they became at seeing Hazur. And so the thing is, these are the type of things that you can mention to some extent, but you can't fully incorporate. And one of the,
and I think for especially the Syrians, I think it's knowing their background, or even in peaceful times, the Syrians would only pray and wish to be able to meet the Khalifa of the time, because you had to be either you had to be wealthy or have the links to be able to go out of Syria in the good days. And after the recent calamities, this is one at least positive side for them to see. We never dreamt of Allah fulfilling our dream and prayer in such a manifestation, either in Canada or these are the Syrians I'm talking about. There's lots of them in Europe, as you may know.
And I guess these are the types of things that you can't put on paper.
I mean, the thing is, you certainly can't capture it fully. And the other thing that you can't capture is the scope of the burden on Khalifatul Masih. For example, in Sweden, I met a lady who just came out of a mulaqat, and she was weeping with tears. And so I asked her, I said, is everything okay? And she said that she just met Hazur and she'd shared all of her burdens with Hazur. She had told me that she'd got divorced because of the fact that her husband was not so attached to the Jamaat. And she didn't want to be in a marriage where her husband was guiding her away from the Jamaat. And so for that reason, for that noble reason, she took divorce. But ever since, she'd struggled to remarry, and it had been a good 4 or 5 years. And she said that I've just been inside and I've just told Hazur all of my problems. I opened my heart before him and he gave me reassurance. He helped me, he guided me, his prayers will sustain me. And that was one person I spoke to. And for the next 2 or 3 days, I felt very upset thinking about her troubles. And then I thought that Hazur meets hundreds of people like this on a daily basis. He receives thousands of letters where again Ahmadis open their hearts to him. And they say that these are our issues. You pray for us, you help us, you guide us. And because Hazur loves every single Ahmadi, wherever they are in the world, that type of burden that is on Khalifatul Masih, neither MTA, nor my diaries, nor anything else can truly comprehend and capture.
Absolutely.
It's the personal experiences. People would tell you about the fulfillment of Hazur's prayers for them, whether it's for work, progeny, or difficulties, or anything that they may face. And even today I had a phone call from someone who was a recent Syrian who moved to Austria, and he met Hazur during Germany. He told him about his troubles, and now he's saying that because of Hazur's prayers, everything has been resolved. And you hear these very, very sensitive stories, and you can't share that or no, you can't capture that in the fullest.
Well, I guess this aspect goes hand in hand with the verse in Surah An-Nur, the ayat Istikhlaf, that Khilafat turns fear into peace. And these are the examples that you're presenting in front of us right now. But Munir Saab, you have seen Hazur grace various Jalsa Salanas throughout the world. What is distinctive about these conferences as compared to other world conferences?
I think it's every Jalsa has its own uniqueness, but one thing which is common, that you see all these people from different nationalities, from different creeds, different traditions, different cultures are united under one banner, under one leader, under one Khalifa, and under one message, which is calling and asking for, and this is the message that Huzur is carrying to every corner of the world, is to love your Creator and fulfill the duties or His rights, and love His creation and fulfill the duties, your duties to them. And this is how you create a peaceful world. And this is our Jalsa been built on those principles, and these are the teachings that Huzur delivers during those Jalsas. And that unity that you see is unheard of. I mean, it's not an exaggeration, but if you see, sometimes it's very hard to unite people within the one country. But you're seeing so many nationalities from 70, 80, 90, sometimes nationalities gathering in one place, at one hand, at one heart, and beating with the same heartbeat of the Khalifa of the time. This is the amazing part. And as the Holy Quran says, the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, لو أنفقت ما في الأرض جميعا لما ألفت بين قلوبهم ولكن الله ألف. That even if you spend whatever you have in this world to unite people's hearts, you will not be able to do so. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is the one that unites them. And this is for me, this is a prophet. This is a proof of the truth of Jamaat Ahmadiyya and its success. And not only other people who kind of gather around the Jamaat Ahmadiyya, around Khilafat, also benefit. You know, when we go to the Capitol Hill, for example, or to other, especially political institutions, they see that those parties never sit in one room together, and they admit that. It says, Your Holiness, you are the one, you should come more often because you're the one who kind of brings us all together. And in other places as well, that normally these parties don't kind of gather. And this is the unity that really represents Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's unity in this world. And it's represented by the Jama'ah of the Promised Messiah alayhi salatu wasalam, and the Khulafa after him.
And I guess a prime example of this unity would be the international Bay'at ceremony in the Jalsa UK, where everyone is connected through one chain, eventually leading up to Hazur's hand.
Absolutely. And just one thing Munir Saab mentioned was about the different cultures coming together. And at this Jalsa, one of the unique features was that the first ever Maori Ahmadi, who was just recently converted some time ago, came to the UK Jalsa. And they have a tradition where they meet nose to nose. And when Hazur met him after Jalsa, Hazur met him as well nose to nose. And Hazur actually said to him, I wish you had met all the MDs at Jalsa nose to nose, so that everybody would know that the Maoris are here and are represented at Jalsa Salana.
Well, Sahab, can you please carry on and tell us some more faith-inspiring incidences?
The thing is that there's just so many ways that we see during Hazur's tours and activities here in London as well, about how he's reforming and how the world is, or at least MD population, MD people are coming towards seeing the miracles of Ahmadiyyat. For example, in Denmark, I met a young man. He was an Arab MD, born and raised in Denmark. He was 21 or 22. And he told me that for a couple of years prior to, in the past couple of years, some of his friends who were non-MD had started talking to him about saying that MDs are not, God forbid, true Muslims. And they started putting this in his ear to the extent that he stopped coming to our mosque and he started to go to their mosques. And he said that it had a very strong impact to the extent that he started to believe that, God forbid, Ahmadiyyat is not the true Islam. He said he had two friends in particular who were very, very staunch and who had guided him away. But he said that one day in the middle of the night, one of those friends called him and he was completely drunk and out of his mind, and he was talking nonsense and rubbish the way a drunk person would. So he said, yeah, I felt very, very sorry that this person who is saying his is the true Islam is acting in this way. Then his other friend, he didn't see him for quite a while, and he became quite concerned that where has he gone. So he went and visited his mother, and he knocked on her door and he asked, where's my friend? And she said, haven't you heard? He's gone to Syria, he's joined Daesh, ISIS. And then a few weeks later they found out that he'd been killed fighting as a terrorist. So he said that when I saw this, that these were the two people who took me away, telling me that these are not true Muslims, God forbid, and this is their end result. And yet the Ahmadis that I know are people who are peaceful, and who are peaceful and loving, who follow the true principles of Islam. So he said he started coming back to the mosque, and it so happened that Hazur's tour was soon after. And he said that during that week, the spirituality he felt, just seeing Hazur walk past every day, he said it was unbelievable, nothing could compare to it. And he had his own mulaqat, and he said that those feelings of joy and the contentment of heart Hazur gave him were quite unbelievable. And I remember I mentioned this incident to Hazur afterwards as well. And Hazur said that this is how Allah Ta'ala sometimes brings good people, pious people back to the faith themselves by showing them the truth. You also, Manisa, mentioned about the effect on external people. I remember in Copenhagen, I met this lady, and she said that her and her husband had been debating in the morning, these are obviously non-Muslims, about whether they should attend the Copenhagen reception where Hazur would deliver an address. And she said she was keen out of curiosity to attend, to see who this Khalifa was and what his message was. But her husband was very fearful. He said that, who knows, there might be a suicide bombing there, or there might be a terrorist attack, so I don't want to attend. And so she said that I shamed him into coming by saying, look, I'm going, and if you want to stay behind, then stay behind, but I'm going to see what's happening. So she said that just out of shame, that he didn't want to leave his wife, he came along. And she said that afterwards, he and I were both completely stunned. We had never heard such words of wisdom, such truths about the issues of our time, as Hazur had mentioned in his speech. And she said that if any person failed to attend this event who was invited, they should regret it for the rest of their lives. Also, you mentioned the verse of the Quran about how Khilafat turns a state of panic and fear into a state of peace. I remember in Sweden, the Malmö reception for the opening of the mosque. This time it was scheduled for 11 o'clock in the morning. And Manisa will remember this well, that unfortunately the Jamaat wasn't ready on time. The guests were waiting outside, and it was 20 to 11, quarter to 11. They were still setting the tables. Manisab's team started setting the table. I was setting the table myself, along with other people. But Hazur's very punctual, and so at exactly 11 o'clock, Hazur came down. And Hazur saw that there was a state of chaos everywhere. And he said, what is the problem? And they said that we haven't set the tables, think the guests are outside. Hazur said, the tables, everything can be set later. Bring the guests up. Let's start the event. Immediately, within a state of a couple of minutes, everything changed. And we had that direction. And for those few minutes, just incidentally, Hazur went to his office just while they set it up. And I remember Hazur said to me, he said that even you were setting the table today. And I still don't know how Hazur knew that, but somehow he did. And I'll just share one more, that at this year at Jalsa, there was a missionary who came from America. Anyway, during one of the mulaqats, Hazur asked him how his wife was. And later on, he told me the story. And he said that about 2 weeks before Jalsa, his wife suddenly, who was very healthy, became seriously unwell, to the point that she started bleeding, and they took her to the hospital, and the doctors had given up hope. And she's very young, in her 20s. And the doctors said that there's nothing can be done to save her now. He said he sent an urgent message to London requesting Hazur's prayers. And he said the reply he got from Hazur was that on the one hand, Hazur prescribed some homeopathic medicines. But apart from that, Hazur said, look after your wife for the next few days, but then come for UK Jalsa. And he said, when I heard this phrase, that come for UK Jalsa, I knew my wife would be okay, because otherwise Hazur wouldn't have called me. And he said within 2 days, she made an absolute miraculous recovery, to the extent that the doctors could not believe it. And even now, when he talks to them, they say that it's unprecedented how a person could recover in this way. And so then she recovered, and he came to the Jalsa and was able to meet Hazur. So there's countless incidents, but I just shared a couple.
Right, Jazakallah. Munir Sahib, wherever Hazur goes, the special grace and support of Allah can be seen. Now, through the lens of MTA, could you give us some examples of that special grace or support that you can see via MTA?
I think it's just one thing that I witness and notice everywhere is whenever Hazrat Khalifa al-Masih Ayadullah arrives, sometimes whether you go, I was one of the team that went to the parliament before Huzur arrived, the day before or 2 days before, and there are so many restrictions, so many things you can do, can't do, and things like that. And sometimes even with other arrangements of security, if you travel to other countries, whether it's customs, whether arrangements of arrivals or of cars and things like that. But when Huzur arrives, suddenly everything fits into the place as if it was planned. And this is where you think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kind of has planned everything for his arrival. And it's not, and we should mention that whatever the Jamaat or the local Jamaats kind of manage or arrange or try to organize, it's nothing compared to the result that we witness. And everybody is always surprised. You know, we do very little, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses it many folds. And we witness that every single time with no exaggeration. And this is the beauty. And it's one thing to, I think the main thing about the message of Ahmadiyyat is not only a message of Islam. It's not just a collection of great ideas. It's a philosophy of life. It's something that we can practice. It's something that can resolve all the issues that we have in the world. And Abid Saab has mentioned some of those people who traveled. Especially, I can mention some of the Syrians brothers that I've witnessed and I've seen coming from the extreme end where they're kind of can cause potentially terror and upset for people. With this message, they're softened and they become peace-loving. And if you see them, and I met one of them in Canada, you won't believe that this is a tough man who is able to commit atrocities, you know, passing by and crying. In Calgary, the last reception that he took a permission to be able to come from Toronto to Calgary, and I saw him hiding behind a curtain, and I was worried me for a little bit in the beginning, thinking of his background, but I was like, what? And I waved to him to come towards me, so he came, and he was absolutely crying, and I was thinking, what's wrong? And he was really crying in tears, and he said, Huzur is about to leave in 2 days, and I don't know how I'm going to handle this. And this is a guy who saw transformation. He used to come 9:30 in the morning with his 2 kids, just to see if Huzur passes by a few seconds to go to the office. And then he would go and wait in the mosque for 2 hours just to be able to go in the first or the second line. And this is the effect that this message has, practical solution to what we have in this world today.
Right, and Abid Saab, really quickly in 2 minutes, through the eyes of press and media, how do you see the special succor and the grace and mercy of Allah on Huzur Anwar during his tours?
Yeah, I mean, it's completely as Manisab said, that whatever our efforts and output is, or our efforts are the output, the result is 1,000,000 times more. And that is where you really see the blessings of Allah the Almighty. For example, Canada this year, the team there who had been arranging the media was a very young team. They actually made me feel very old. But the thing is that, and they were inexperienced doing it for the first time, yet the results were truly incredible. In every city that Huzur was, there was interview after interview. So many, the biggest channels, the biggest journalists, they were all desperate to come and interview Huzur, to hear him. For example, Peter Mansbridge, who's considered or called the voice of Canada, he came and interviewed Huzur at the mosque, and that was a very important feature piece that came out later in the tour. Then, and you could see the results as well. I remember we were in Saskatoon. There was some of our MDs who just went for a local coffee, and there was people in the coffee shop reading the local newspaper. And on the front page, there was a photo of Huzur and his message of peace. Similarly, when Huzur arrived in Calgary from Saskatoon, I remember as we came out from the airport, I happened to be just a pace behind where Huzur was walking, and suddenly I saw this family rush towards Huzur, and it was just an ordinary Canadian family waiting at the airport. And they said, we saw you on Peter Mansbridge. We want our photo taken with you. Is that okay? And we want to thank you for your message of peace that you are giving to our country. And so as Manisab so eloquently said, that the message, that our efforts are blessed incredibly.
Well, respected panelists, Abid Saab and Munir Saab, I'd like to thank you for joining us in our discussion today and letting the viewers see Khilafat through your eyes. And also, of course, Jazakallah to the viewers for joining us in today's program. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
लाएंगे सदाकते इस्लाम कुछ भी हो जाएंगे हम जहाँ भी के जाना पड़े हमें जाएंगे हम जहाँ भी के जाना